Welcome to the 3 Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. 3 Martinis coming up.
Well, happy Monday. Sure wish it was a lot happier. To keep with the mood of the day on Wall Street and beyond, there are no good martinis today. Bad, and crazy. We do have good news, though, on our sponsor. It's Figs. Then 3 Martini Lunch listeners can now get 15% off for a limited time from Figs. Just go to wearfigs.com and enter the code Martini15, Martini15 at checkout. Jim, who wanted to retire anyway? I mean, really, it wasn't that important. It was just, putting money away for the golden years. But no, obviously, we're going through a downturn right now. The markets had a very rough start this morning. So bad, in fact, that the S&P 500 was down 7% 5 minutes after the opening bell, which automatically triggered a halt in trading. It came back up. Things are still way down, roughly 4 to 5% as we're recording here around noon Eastern time. And by the time you hear this, who knows exactly how it's going to look. But, Jim, I never thought I'd be looking at a Wall Street board of the Dow and say, oh, it's only down 1,200 now. That's better, because it was down 2,000 earlier. And Jim, there's obviously the 3 different factors that are working here. There's concern about economic global disruption here with the coronavirus and things not being able to get sent from one part of the world to another, different areas being quarantined. Then you've got a bond market where the 10-year Treasury is yielding less than 1% for the first time ever. That's got a lot of folks freaked out on Wall Street. And, oh, by the way, the Saudis decided to play around with their oil supply and pricing, so that oil's now, at least at the moment, below $35 a barrel. So that's got a lot of folks worried as well, although for consumers, for the time being, that should be good news. And as we talked about last week, we've kind of got this recycle triangle. Markets freak out, media freaks out, public freaks out, markets freak out, just over and over and over again. And here's a couple of examples of that. This is from the New York Post. They quote a guy named Chris Rupke, who's chief financial economist at a place called MUFG Union Bank. And his very measured tone here says, "The sky is falling. Get out. Get out while you can," he wrote Sunday. "Wall Street's woes have to eventually hit Main Street's economy hard. Bet on it." So he's taking things all in stride here. And then last week, even before all these other factors hit, this is MSNBC. Nicole Wallace with a Princeton professor named Glaude, Glaude, Eddie Glaude. Here's how they're looking at Trump and coronavirus.
But I was thinking about this in terms of politics, right? We talked about the business community finally not kind of sticking with Donald Trump. But this may be, and Nicole, I should mention this with little trepidation, but this may be Donald Trump's Katrina.
Yeah, you can have to trepidation because of my role in that. I mean, let's just lean into that for a minute. I mean, Katrina was the moment when all of the things that felt incredibly incompetent about the Bush presidency, the appointment of Harriet Miers to the Supreme Court, the botched attempt to pass Social Security privatization. I mean, I lived it. I can go through the whole list. Were realized. We gave them a proof point that we were indeed incompetent. And also people died. I mean, this has the making structurally for the same kind of moment for President Trump.
And if there's any moment that would shake that 40%, the folks who would allow him to shoot someone and write down 50, if there's any moment, it's this one. Because it's babies, it's friends, it's loved ones.
It's old people in nursing homes that can't have their daughters and sons and grandchildren.
It's your nana, right? And so it seems to me that this is an event that could take down a president.
All right, Jim, as we've said before, coronavirus is serious. Precautions need to be taken, particularly those with vulnerable conditions. But the full freak out is on here, and it's having a very negative effect, I think, far beyond what it needs to be doing right now.
I'm trying to think where to begin, Greg. The first thing that comes to mind is as Nicole Wallace talks about how incompetent the Bush administration was.
Right.
So she was on the White House staff during Bush's first term, special assistant to the president, director of media affairs at the White House, joined the presidential campaign in 2004 as communications director, and then, of course, he was the White House communications director from 2005 to July 2006. So when she says all that terrible incompetence in the Bush White House, we learned it from watching you, right? This is your former coworkers, but I guess we really shouldn't be that surprised by Nicole Wallace stabbing people she worked with in the back. I suppose when you're saying, goodness gracious, this could involve mass death, this could really help the Democrats in November. Try not to smile so much when you say that on MSNBC guests. try to recognize that this is really bad and that no one should be all that gleeful about it. As for the circumstances in the markets, look, it's a bad day. Don't check your 401k. Now here's the thing. If you're in the markets for the long run, you're probably going to be fine. I'm going to emphasize, in red ink, probably. You could argue that we've had such a good long run, particularly in the markets for so long, that we were due for a correction. And it just feels like the stock markets in particular, could handle the risk of the coronavirus. We saw last week down 1,000 points and back up 900 points the next day. They can handle a certain amount of risk. And then Russia and OPEC getting into this price war and drastically reducing their prices, the talk that you might see oil go down to less than $20 a barrel. That sounds like one thing that the markets were just not ready to cope for, and that's what made the dam burst. It's a really bad day in the markets today. My guess is, if not tomorrow, that at some point you'd see some people saying, I think we hit bottom. I think it's a good time to start buying again. This is not me recommending buy the dip, because you may recall about a week or two ago people saying, buy the dip, and then it went down a couple more 1,000 points. So this is not a financial podcast. Make the decisions that are right for you, but recognize that over the long run, the stock market generally goes up. It usually goes up slowly. Sometimes it goes up very fast. Sometimes it goes back down. All in all, if you're not looking to retire for another decade or so, you're probably going to be fine. You should not freak out ever after each one of these turns in the market. The other thing which kind of jumps out is that, as I mentioned earlier, the gas prices are going to go down. We are heading into some, severely choppy economic waters, but a drastic reduction in the gas prices puts more money into Americans' pockets. They're more able to spend money on stuff, probably Purell and delivery food and things like that. The other one, also, you mentioned the interest rates going down lower. Interest rates for a 30-year mortgage in a lot of places are now between 2% and 3%. So all of these things that are showing you bad economic news, there are circumstances where certain groups of Americans will be doing better off, home buyers and people who need to spend a lot of gas. I don't know about you, Greg. I have a feeling that this is bad. This is going to be pretty bad. Warmer weather should slow down the spread of the coronavirus. I've heard some people saying only 10%, 20%. If we get our precautions in place, this will be a rough couple of stretch for next couple of weeks, next couple of months. By the end of summer, things may be looking considerably better. And if we've had a giant, tumble in the markets, you could see a nice big boom when people say, okay, this particular risk has passed. We're doing better. We're back. All the fundamentals that were in place before the coronavirus are there. And by the way, maybe you'll have pent-up demand. Now, in the meantime, you're going to have a rough stretch for cruise lines and hotels and airlines and anybody involved in tourism and travel and stuff like that. But by and large, if we can get through this, there's probably a nice big boom on the other end of it. A big question is, does that come before or after Election Day 2020?
Yeah, very good question. And like you said, I'm certainly not a financial expert. We need one of the other Columbus brothers to fully put this into perspective. But in terms of the political language being used, the media lighting their hair on fire, I mean, it's pretty clear that that's not just a matter of covering a story for a lot of these people. They're whipping it up and they're trying to put a political spin on it. And that's about as irresponsible as you can get. Our sponsor today is not only Figs, it's perhaps the most timely Figs advertisement we've ever had on the 3 Martini Lunch, because as we know, more people are coming down with the virus and more folks are going to be seeking medical attention. And that means the folks on the front lines here are more critical than ever. Keeping them healthy is more critical than ever, especially as they face higher and higher demand, more and more crowded hospitals and other facilities and so forth. So we want them to be performing at peak capability, and that means, of course, staying healthy. And part of that is being able to avoid catching this virus or the flu or whatever else is going around at a given time. Did you know that a nurse walks about 5 miles per shift, or doctors can work up to 80 hours per week? Medical professionals seem practically superhuman, but they do need things to help them do their job very well. And that's where Figs comes in. Figs is an incredible company that is doing their best to make life comfortable for doctors and nurses and other medical professionals. They design medical apparel that looks good, feels good, and helps medical professionals perform at their best no matter what their day throws at them. And Jim, we know the coming days might throw quite a bit at them.
Exactly. Look, chances are your doctor, your nurse, your healthcare provider, anybody you deal with on a regular basis, they're probably swamped right now. But if you want to say thank you, if you want to say, hey, thanks for putting in all those extra hours, you probably want to think about figs, either gift cards or if you don't know the exact apparel that they're looking for. Fig scrubs are packed with tons of features and functionality. They created their own fabric that is antimicrobial, which sounds really important right about now, anti-wrinkle, moisture-wicking, full of stretch, and ridiculously soft. And they have pockets, tons of pockets. Some of their styles include more than 10 pockets, which is amazingly useful when you have a stethoscope, pens, a pen light, scissors, tape, alcohol pads, sanitizer, snacks, more snacks. You get the idea.
Jim, as a lot of folks know, I had a chance to try out some of the different Figs gear. A pair of socks that was very comfortable. You think one pair of socks is the same as the other? Not so. Went on a long walk in these socks. Much more comfortable than when I'm wearing my other socks. So definitely strong quality there. And then, of course, the active wear jacket. And Jim, you mentioned the pockets. There's pockets all over the place, but it still looks really good. It's very comfortable. It keeps you at a good body temperature. I can wear it anywhere from the 40s to the 60s degrees out. And scrubs, of course, are the main thing that Fig sells here. And I had no need for the scrubs, but your favorite medical professional certainly does, particularly now. They could always use an extra set. And like Jim said, there's no better way to say thank you. So do you have a doctor in your house, or do you just have a favorite doctor or a vet tech or a radiologist or anybody else who helps other people when it comes to healthcare? Tell them about Figs or get them a gift. Listeners of the 3 Martini Lunch can now get 15% off for a limited time. Go to wearfigs.com, wearfigs.com, and enter the code Martini15. That's Martini15 at checkout. All right, Jim, we'll be back to coronavirus in our crazy martini, but we have one more bad martini to get to first. And that's because the effort for the Republicans to hang on to the majority in the United States Senate just got a bit more complicated. That's because out in Montana, where Republican Steve Daines is running for a second term, the 2-term governor, a Democrat named Steve Bullock, has decided he's running for the U.S. Senate after all. Here's part of his launch video.
Montana's unemployment rate, the lowest in over a decade.
The outdoor economy has been booming. Businesses reach record high exports. Montana high school students are graduating at a higher rate than ever before.
Governor Steve Bullock signed one of the biggest bills of the 2019 session today.
Coverage to more than 90,000 Montanans.
The bill is a way to prevent dark money groups from controlling an election.
Steve Bullock gives final approval to invest in Montana's infrastructure.
And you know what's great? Every one of us own these public lands.
So in the span of about 30 seconds there, he talks about allegedly how he's responsible for low unemployment, higher exports, good graduation rates, expanded health care coverage, getting dark money out of politics, improved infrastructure, and protecting public lands. And so, Jim, this is going to be a tough race. I think Bullock probably did hurt himself with his total dud of a presidential campaign that most listeners probably forgot about. But while I think Daines will probably be favored here, it's going to be a tough fight, which means more resources diverted from other races that are going to be tough to win.
Yeah, from the moment it became clear that Bullock was thinking about this pretty seriously, the chances of Republicans keeping the Senate got a little bit worse. Yeah, as you mentioned, Montana, Trump is going to win this state. That's really not in dispute. And yes, Steve Bullock, on the one hand, he probably hurt himself with the presidential campaign, Greg. On the other hand, it was only 10 minutes or so? Just enough time to be on one debate stage and say, oh, that guy, It's for what's worth noting. Steve Bullock's message on that debate stage was, hey, Democrats, don't forget all of us who live in red states. Not the worst message for Democrats to hear, one that they largely ignored, but, right on brand for the governor of Montana. He's going to be a tough candidate. I don't know if you say that Steve Daines is toast, but I think you say anytime you've got a guy who's been elected statewide more than once, is a current governor, he's probably got a pretty decent approval rating. This is going to be a tough race. And as you mentioned, this is going to be one that's going to drain resources. The good news is this is not a state where you have really terribly expensive TV markets and stuff like that. It's going to be a close race either way. But again, if you're the Republicans, considering the status of Collins up in Maine and Gardner out in Colorado and Tillis in North Carolina, that even when you got the Doug Jones seat, you're probably going to win. Even when you no longer have Bernie Sanders at the top of the ticket, depressing Democratic turnout in certain places. This is going to be a tough cycle for the National Republican Senatorial Committee. No two ways about it. Be prepared. Start, getting ready. is it lost? No, but that's just, one more thing to worry about for Republicans who want to keep the Senate.
Yeah, absolutely right. Did a little bit of research here, Jim. Trump currently has a 52% approval rating in Montana and will be at the top of the ticket. If that remains fairly close, that should help Daines a little bit. In winning the governorship twice, Bullock won by 1.5 points in 2012 and by 3 points in 2016. Daines won by 17 points in 2014, although I don't know a lot about the caliber of his opposition that year. And in terms of the presidential campaign for Bullock, not only did he go nowhere, he tried to move left on guns at one point and came out in favor of a ban on what he called assault weapons, meaning AR-15s and so forth. And so if he's seen as wobbly on the gun issue in Montana, I think that could do him some damage.
It could. The advantage to having a really awesome year for Republicans in the Senate like 2014 is it means 6 years later they have to go back on a presidential election year, which traditionally turnout's a little bit higher. Sometimes it works a little worse. But again, Trump being at the top of the ticket in Montana presumably would help Daines. But, we have a whole bunch of people who kind of elected with the wind at their back, and we don't know if the wind will be at their back or in their faces come November.
Well, speaking of being in their faces, let's talk about our other Martini related to coronavirus. It's our crazy. And for that, Jim, we have to go back to CPAC. You and I were in the neighborhood of CPAC. I don't know if you actually went in the hall or not. Apparently, according to Matt Schlapp, the head of the American Conservative Union, which organizes CPAC, there was one attender and now possibly two that have tested positive for coronavirus. Schlapp says he's fine. His wife is fine. Ted Cruz apparently knows who this person is, even though the name's not public. Says he shook hands with him briefly, doesn't have any symptoms 10 days later. But you know what? Just out of an abundance of caution, he's going to quarantine himself for a few more days. Paul Gosar, a congressman from Arizona, apparently spent a little more time with this person. He says he's also fine so far, but also he and several staff members are going to be taking several days off and lying low just to make sure that they don't spread anything that they're not feeling yet. So, Jim, on the one hand, abundance of caution, probably good in this situation. On the other hand, it's fun to watch Twitter and folks saying, oh, yeah, I might have run into that guy. I think I better take the week off. And so it's just interesting to see what's happening here. What's your thoughts on how CPAC is handling this and everything else?
Well, first of all, Greg, aren't you glad that I invited you to that National Review gathering that was held down the street from CPAC?
Oh, yeah, really glad now.
I'm sure you're like, good job, Jim. Look, here's the problem. As far as we know, it's one person. It is the person, and we know this person is being treated in New Jersey. If you did not shake hands with someone who went up to New Jersey and you haven't had any symptoms yet, you're probably feeling fine. Now, the other complication is that almost every year at CPAC, you hear people talking about the CPAC crud. You have a gathering of in the neighborhood of 15,000 to 20,000 people. They all get together. They all shake hands. People exchange germs and viruses, and people come back with their coughs and sniffles and all that kind of stuff. I'm sure there are a lot of people right now who are sitting there thinking, was that just the usual CPAC crud, or is it something worse? I understand the need to preserve the privacy of the person who's been diagnosed. On the other hand, we don't know if this person, coughed into their hand and then pressed an elevator button or touched a railing on an escalator or a stairway or used the ATM and you press the buttons. There are a lot of little ways that you can end up spreading a virus without really thinking about it. At this point, I mentioned all this not to freak anybody out. As I was in the hall for a couple hours. I don't think I encountered this person. Feeling fine. If I keel over in the near future, you can play back this podcast and say, see, Jim wasn't taking it seriously enough. I do think, however, considering the nature of these things, this is probably not the only person who got infected. Ted Cruz and Congressman Gosar are probably doing the right thing in this circumstance, but I think you're going to see a lot more of these things at every major gathering that you see. It's spreading too quickly. The good news is most people are going to be asymptomatic. It's not going to be noticed. When you have the Los Angeles Marathon, that big gathering they had up in Seattle, just as we were having our conversation, Greg, Ireland announced the St. Patrick's Day Parade is being canceled. I think we're going to have to avoid big gatherings for the next couple of weeks. I think it's just a sad state of affairs, but you got to do this because this is a life and death matter for people who are elderly and who may have some sort of problems with their immune system. I understand CPAC's got to protect the privacy of particular patients. That having been said, the more information you can give to people about whether they were likely to be exposed, the better. We will see how things shake out from here. But, Greg, I've been looking forward to not covering CPAC this year. So glad National Review had to do an event, and boy, I hope Cam really appreciates me appearing on his show this year.
Well, considering
Cam.
Considering all the duties you had in previous years, you might be
That's a good point.
counting your blessings this year. But yeah, I mean, we've seen South by Southwest canceled in Austin. A women's professional tennis tournament scheduled for this coming week has been canceled so far. Thankfully, March Madness not affected, but we'll see. Here's my question, though, Jim, because obviously there are privacy concerns. You've got HIPAA and all that, and you can't necessarily go blurting out everyone's name. But is it fair for lawmakers to know who this person is and the thousands of other attendees not to know?
That's what I was just about to say. That I'm glad that Ted Cruz feels fine. I'm sure this person, though, did not just shake hands with Ted Cruz and the congressman. Their first statement was that, yes, someone at CPAC has tested positive. Don't worry, the president and vice president are fine. Well, that's great, but I'm pretty sure the president and the vice president are going to have access to the very finest health care, and I'm sure they're probably being checked for any changes in temperature or any signs of ill health, 24/7. Everybody else, the 19,998 other people at CPAC don't have that kind of situation and probably would be better off with a little more information. So I understand CPAC is in a difficult situation right now. We're trying to balance this value of you don't want this person being ostracized, but if people are sitting there thinking, well, did I shake hands with that person or not? Or did the people that I shook hands with, did they shake hands with him? That's why I have my sneaking suspicion this will not be the only case, just because of the ease with which this virus spreads. Presumably everybody's going to be okay. We know that a large number of people are going to be asymptomatic, but Greg, I feel like we're in a situation where more information is better, all things considered.
Yeah, you might think the person would actually just go public with the fact that they're dealing with this, but it's up to them, obviously. Jim, I guess, as I saw on Twitter, we're all Howie Mandel now. He refuses to shake hands ever with people because he's kind of a germaphobe. And
no, we're gonna take the rubber gloves, we're gonna blow them up, and then we're gonna put them over our heads for maximum protection and/or strangulation.
Keep perspective, everyone, and stay with the 3 Martini Lunch. And hopefully we'll all get through this together without too many problems. But, Jim, we'll start with that tomorrow. See you then.
At least it's Friday, Greg. See you tomorrow.
Oh, I wish. Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos, Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. And don't forget about the great offer over at Figs. Perfect time to do something nice for that doctor, nurse, or other medical professional in your life. 3 Martini Lunch listeners get 15% off for a limited time. Wearfigs.com, code Martini15, Martini15 at checkout. Please subscribe to the podcast, leave us kind reviews, and don't forget that those home devices can play the podcast as well. All you have to do is say, play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. And tune in Tuesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.